Hello, my name is Troy Hanton, and I will be talking about the Venus Venera Program. So, let's talk a bit about Venus. Venus is the second planet closest to our Sun in our solar system. It has an average temperature of 872 Fahrenheit and is roughly about the same size as Earth. It is sometimes referred to as Earth's sister due to its many similarities to our own planet. The Venera program was run by a space program that doesn't exist anymore, the USSR space program. The Soviet Union is credited with many space achievements, which were a result of the infamous space race. This included launching the first man-made object to space and in orbit, the first human in space, and the first man-made object to be sent to another planet's surface. Which brings us to the Venera program. The Venera program, or Venus program in English, was dedicated to studying and exploring the planet Venus and its environment. There were 16 missions of its kind, and all moved us a step closer to understanding the mysterious planet. Now, it took the Russians some time to successfully retrieve information from Venus. The first 6 Venera programs were sent to gather information about Venus's atmosphere by doing a flyby or going around its orbit. You can see in the picture what the first 6 probes generally looked like. However, there were many failures. Venera 1 and later Venera 2 lost connection with Earth before it even got to Venus. It wasn't until the third try with Venera 3 did they only kind of achieve something. The probe crash-landed on Venus and didn't gather any data, but was the first man-made object to touch the surface of another planet. The Veneras, all the way up to Venera 7, were mostly failures. However, one thing was clear. The atmosphere and the temperature of the planet was very harsh, and the Russians would have to accommodate for that on future Venera missions. And this was their accommodation. The Veneras from 7 and on were designed to land on the surface of Venus and collect information. So they made a craft that has a very thick shell around the instruments inside it to try and withstand the pressures and temperature of the planet. Venera 7 had a parachute to make the descent onto the planet without crashing and damaging itself. However, the parachute was damaged in the descent, but surprisingly survived the fall. It landed at an angle where the antenna couldn't give a clear signal back to Earth, but it survived for about 20 minutes before succumbing to the planet. The Venera program really only was more successful from there. Venera 8 had the same design and a better parachute. It also contained even more scientifical instruments than the previous craft. It had a device called a photometer, which, according to Britannica, is, quote, a device that measures the strength of electromagnetic radiation in the range from ultraviolet to infrared and including the visible spectrum, end quote. They were attempting, essentially, to see if sunlight reached the surface of Venus, or at least is visible for pictures from a camera for future missions. Venera 8 landed successfully and made the discovery that Venus's clouds hung high in the air and the atmosphere was fairly clear. Venera 9 and 10 had a little bit of a different design. They kept on sending them with newer instruments and tools to try and withstand the harsh Venus environment and to collect more data. But most importantly, they sent them with a camera. And this was the first photo ever taken from the surface of another planet. Although it's in black and white, it's still fascinating to see the terrain that it landed on. You can see many rocks jutting out from the ground, suggesting that Venus's terrain is mostly a rough, rocky surface like Earth's. Venera 9 was the most successful of its kind thus far. So then the Russians were given some new motivation to continue the Venera program from the successes of Venera 10 and launched 2 more probes to land on Venus. Venera 11 and 12 were both sent with cameras. However, the functions for the cameras on both craft failed and could not provide any images from the planet. They did provide some weather data, but the missions were not considered a huge success like the previous mission. Venera 13 is considered one of the most successful missions to Venus. This time, they added a color camera and, more importantly, a drill to analyze some soil. The landing was a success and took even more wonderful pictures. Here is the picture that Venera 13 took, and here is what Venera 14 took. Note how there is a yellow haze surrounding the environment. This suggests that sunlight scatters around many chemicals and particles in the atmosphere. The drilling experiment was a success as well, with the first analysis of soil from a different planet. They determined it to be very similar to volcanic sediment. This suggests that the planet may have been a fiery and volcanic landscape long ago, just like Earth was. Venera 15 and 16 were the last missions of its name. They both were just orbital probes, meaning they weren't designed to land on the surface, but remained in orbit and collected data. The data that they were hoping to collect was a surface radar reading of the surface of Venus. They couldn't do the whole planet, but they graphed most of the northern hemisphere. Let's take a look at some of the radar readings from both missions. If you look closely, you can see the rocky and mountainy terrain. After all the images were collected, scientists were able to make this image. It is truly fascinating how we have this much detail of the surface of another planet. The Soviet Venera missions were one of, if not the most impactful glimpses of another planet. Venera often gets overlooked due to its association with the Soviet Union and even recent missions to Mars. However, I would argue that Venus and the Venera missions deserve as much attention as any other planetary exploration. Perhaps one day, humanity will revisit Venus again and continue the mission that Venera mapped out and took the dive into before us. This was Troy Hanton, and I hope you enjoyed learning about the Venera program.